Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I want to thank Stefano for inviting me, and AUI and everybody at AUI for welcoming me and making me feel at home. And actually, it's not just AUI, it's all of Morocco. I mean, as soon as I set my foot in the embassy in Jordan, everybody was very welcoming and always smiling. So thank you very much for giving me that feeling that I'm at home. And before I start my talk, I just want to make a point that I am here to learn as much as you are here to learn. So this is mutual. So please, if you have any questions, any comments, and most importantly, if you have any critiques, please share them, because that's the only way we can grow and learn together. All right? So please keep your notebooks or your phones up and take notes. Now, first of all, I'm really happy that I'm very proud that I was able to set foot and stand in the first university in the world, which was the University of Akhawayn in Fez yesterday. And so you really must be very, very, very proud. And you need to tell the world that this is where the first university was made, and it was initiated by a woman, which is even something more to be proud of, Fatima al-Fihri. So I was very proud to be there and think about her and what went through her mind as she came up with this idea and established it and ran it which is still running today. Now, you know, in the past, if we look at history, it is said that there were two groups of people. There were a group of people who sat around the fire and told stories, and there was another group of people who looked at those people who were telling stories around the fire and saying, these guys are wasting their time just telling stories. Shouldn't they be doing something more useful? But can you guess which group of people actually survived today? Was it the storytellers or the people who were not storytellers? Who do you think are the ones who survived? It was the storytellers. So storytelling is essential and fundamental to our survival as a species. So in the spirit of evolution, because we evolved to be a storytelling species, I'm going to share a number of stories as I go through my talk today. I'm going to briefly introduce my science. So as Stefano said, I'm a molecular cell biologist. I actually work in two major fields. Just to give you some background of where I come from, my first field is I work on genetics of ethnic populations in Jordan. So I study the Circassian population and the Chechen population. These two populations were forcibly evicted from their home countries in southern Russia today, and they fled to the to Jordan and other surrounding countries. And so we became the world experts in studying them in terms of their genetics, diseases. We've discovered a new gene that's related to diabetes, and we are really proud that we were able to publish our research in Nature. The second field that I work in is studying the impact of war and trauma on refugees or people who have been through this trauma, even if they're not refugees. And what we do is we don't just look at their mental health and psychosocial health, we also look at their physiology. So for example, we look at the hormone cortisol, which is a hormone that we secrete in our body if we get stressed. And the way we measure it is that rather than taking a blood sample or a saliva sample, which is kind of messy because you have to keep spitting into a tube, what we do is we take a hair sample, because the hormone cortisol actually is deposited in your hair, and as your hair grows every month around 1 centimeter, I have a history of your stress in the hair showing the different levels of your cortisol. So we do that, and then lastly we look at the impact of trauma on your DNA. Not that the trauma changes your DNA as a sequence, but it changes how the DNA is expressed. And what we've hypothesized is that this DNA, how it changes in terms of expression, can be transferred across generations. So if a grandmother has has been exposed to trauma, her children, her grandchildren may inherit that change in pattern of DNA expression. So this is really exciting, cutting-edge science that we actually do in my lab in Jordan. But as Stefano said, when you teach, you don't just do research, you actually teach biology. And as you teach biology, you talk about some of the fundamental unifying themes in biology, and one of them is evolution. And so I actually shared how I teach evolution in a Nature article a few years ago, which many maybe of you have read, and actually it's translated into Arabic, so you can share it with others. And it's an easy one-page article that's very accessible. I also give a lot of talks, just to give you my credentials so that you can trust me on this topic. So I've given a lot of talks, not just to science students, to colleagues, scientists across the world, but even to religious scholars. So in Cambridge, England, there's a school for teaching theology, imams, future imams in England, and so I've taught them evolution. I've given some talks about evolution to madrasa teachers in India and Pakistan, and even Muslim Arab scholars across from Al-Azhar, from Jordan and other Arab countries. So hopefully I have some experience in explaining this as we go forward. And usually when I start my class, especially if I'm teaching a course in evolution to my students in Jordan, you know, I come in and the first thing that comes to the mind of my students, which they have told me later, not in my face in the first day, is that, oh my, and I say, I'm going to talk about evolution, they say, oh my God, I'm going to say this in Arabic, إنه راح تكفرنا, جاي تكفرنا هي. بس بعدين they look at me and they say, wait a minute, there's something weird, like هي متحجبة. طيب wait, there's a contradiction here. إذا جاي تكفرنا, طب كيف هي متحجبة? Huh? So this creates some confusion, which is really healthy, because it opens the door a little bit for them to think, maybe she has a point, let's listen to her, right? And I think that's when I get my foot in the door, and I have a little space to share my personal opinion on how I look at this and how I deal with it, all right? So, and this is how we start off our course. And usually, of course, when anybody hears the word evolution, it's like, oh my God, there's a problem, there's a bomb. Although, you know, I need to change this slide, because I remember I gave a talks to some students in another college, and they told me, why every problem people put as a symbol a bomb, right? Especially the Arab world, we're always accused of being terrorists and bombs, and I'm even using the same symbol. So that's very, very wrong. So I'm going to remove this from my next slide, all right? Okay, do you agree with me? Do you think it's not the right appropriation of a problem? Yeah, we can find something better. Yeah, so if anybody has any ideas, what should I put instead of the bomb, please tell me. You can share that with me later. All right, so every time I start talking about evolution, I make sure that we all are on the same basis. And to me, we are very diverse. Therefore, I expect that we have multiple perspectives on different issues in our lives. And so it must be the same for evolution. But to remind ourselves of the differences amongst us in perspectives, I usually do an exercise, which I'm not going to do today because of the number of people in the room. It has to be a smaller number. And I'm planning to do the exercise in Professor Stefano's class. So this is an open invitation, if you don't mind, Stefano, to invite other people into your class. I don't know if there's enough seats, but I'm sure we can sit on the floor. It's okay.
The refreshments are limited.
Okay. All right. So usually what I do is I show this picture. This is a variation of the exercise. I'm not going to let it out today. But what I show this and I ask people, what do you see in this image? So how many of you can see an old woman? Please raise your hand. All right. How many of you see a young woman? Please raise your hand. All right. So not everybody. How many of you can see both? All right, so some of you only see the old woman, some of you only see the young woman, some of you see both, right? And since some of you see both, that means the old woman is correct and the young woman is correct. So this is just an example of just an image where we can split the class into two. Half of you see only an old woman and the other half sees a young woman, and we know that both of you are correct. So this is just a reminder that when we encounter differing opinions in life, that the other different opinion may be correct. Now that doesn't mean that you have to agree with them, but at least you can say maybe there's a reason they think different, and not to just disagree and cross them out as crazy. All right, so to keep that. And that's very important for any dialogue in any situation, not just about evolution, not just in a classroom. This is for family life, between you and your parents, between husbands and wives. Always to listen and to accept that there are different opinions, and it's okay to disagree. So what am I going to talk about in my talk? I'm going to talk about three things. I'm going to talk about why in my opinion, there's no controversy between Islam and science, in particular evolution, and how did such a myth come to be? And lastly, how do I help my students find their way in this dilemma? So first I start, to me, what is the role of humans on earth, to start with? And of course, as a Muslim, obviously, and that's the topic we're talking about. I'm not talking about Christianity. I'm not an authority there, and I can only speak for what I know. is that in Islam, the role of humans on earth is to live in harmony with all the creation around us. And there are many verses to that effect. الإنسان خليفة على الأرض. I'm going to say the verses in Arabic because it's easier. فنحن Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala وضعنا خليفة على الأرض, to take care of this earth, to take care of each other as fellow human beings and all the creatures around us. And then the Quran, therefore, is a guide on how to live our lives in this world, to fulfill that goal, to fulfill that role that was assigned to us, right? It is not a book of science. It's not in a position, that's not the objective, to find every scientific theory, discovery, whatever you want to call it in the Quran. The Quran only gives us the guidelines on how to conduct our lives. And so there are many verses that tells us, guides us, advises us how to use our brains, right? To observe, to question, to follow up with finding explanations. And there's many, many verses that ask us to do that. So the Quran asks us how to use our minds, but it doesn't tell us the answer. Because if it told us the answer, I mean, it's not fun anymore. We'll go home and that's it, right? So it's about keep asking questions all the time. And to me, these verses that talk about observing, انظر ثم انظر, and asking questions, تفكر, and then trying to find answers, is actually the scientific method. What is the scientific method? It's about observing, why, and say, oh, the sky is blue. And then asking a question, I wonder, why is the sky blue? And then trying to come up with an explanation. Oh, maybe because of X, Y, and Z. And then you test your hypothesis, right? You do an experiment. You may be right, you may be wrong. If you're wrong, you go back, make more observations, ask more questions, and you keep going on and on. And even if today you come up with a hypothesis or a theory that you have done experiments to prove, it is only correct today within the circumstances of today. If tomorrow something changes, that theory, that explanation may change, right? And that's the hallmark of being a scientist, that we are always curious and we are always doubtful. We always punch holes. We're very good at critiquing. And that's not just the hallmark of a scientist. That's the hallmark of a human being. And that's what Islam asks us to do, to question. And so scientists, and Islam, the way I see it, is a religion for all of humanity. It's not just for a particular group of people. And it's a way of life. It's not about becoming a Muslim. It's about you will live a life. So you may not necessarily be a Muslim, but you're living a Muslim life. Meaning you're using your brain. You're asking questions. You're questioning. So in that sense, I think scientists all over the world, from different religions and backgrounds, are always asking questions, seeking the truth, trying to find an answer. And one of the beautiful things in Islam, it's a hadith where if a judge makes a judgment and is correct, he gets 2 rewards. And if he's not correct, he gets 1 reward. So you can keep on trying to find answers and proposing hypotheses and answers. And even if you're wrong, it's okay. And that is so freeing. It's a license to keep on going and not to be afraid of asking just in case you're wrong. And because of this understanding of the way we should use our brains, the way of this understanding of how religion plays a role in our life in terms of Islam, we had the Islamic golden age of discovery. So in the past, the Islamic civilization, regardless of the religion of the scholars, because we had Jews, Christians, and Muslims working together, male and female, but there was a plethora of discoveries from every field and discipline you can think of, from philosophy to medicine to physics to biology, you name it, it was there, because they understood how we should employ and implement our religion in our daily lives. And so, from this, I want to fast forward and say, so there are other scientists other than the Islamic, during the Islamic world, there were other scientists that came along later in Europe after the Dark Ages. And one of them was a scientist called Darwin. So he's just another scientist following the same kind of thinking and scientific methodology. So what he did is he observed around him the diversity of species and creatures around him, and he came up with an explanation, a hypothesis, to explain how come all these species came to be. And in a very simple form, his theory is based on 3 points, right? That we have species change over time, that these are derived from common ancestors, and that life on Earth took a very, very long time. So those are the 3 tenets, very, very briefly, of what is evolution about. And we do, as he proposed his explanation of the diversity of species around us, it's not just that this happens naturally as species evolve through the millennia. It actually happens, we as humans have actually been employing those 3 rules in our everyday lives in an artificial way. So to give you 2 examples, we all, I don't know what you had for lunch today, but I'm sure you eat cabbages, you eat radishes, right? You'd eat some of these vegetables I have up here. Well, these vegetables, and broccoli and cauliflower and Brussels, all these are actually a family of plants that come from a wild ancestor. And it happens that thousands of years ago, there was somebody who took something from the ground and tasted it and found it like, it tastes a little bit good, right? And so from the field where he found these, he only picked the ones that tasted better than the others. That tasted better. And then he took them and he planted them again. And he planted the whole field. And then from the whole field, he only took those who tasted better. And then he planted them again. So across generations, what happened to that plant? It started tasting much better, cauliflower. Another human being, in the same field, what captured his or her attention wasn't the taste, it was the color, the red, the radishes. So he only picked the red ones, and he kept planting only the red ones. So eventually, you got radishes that were red, and so on and so forth. This is artificial selection. This is what we do all the time. When you eat watermelons without seeds, this is all artificial selection. That as human beings, we have interfered to select for a better fruit, a better vegetable. Let's leave farmers aside and look at something else. How many of you have had the influenza vaccine for the coming winter? Have you had it? Have you heard of it? You know, especially compromised, older people, younger people, people who are compromised are advised to have the influenza vaccine. What is the influenza vaccine? You have to take it every year because the virus, the influenza virus, changes every year its DNA as a result of selection because it's being selected against in the body. So every year we have to use the background of evolution to predict what is the next year's influenza virus going to look like. And then we make the vaccine and give it to you, hoping to protect you from more severe influenza attacks. So whether we agree or disagree, we're using the products and results of the mechanisms of evolution in our daily lives. And by the way, the concept of evolution is not new to the history of science, even in the Islamic civilization. So if we go back in history and look at the history of science within the Islamic civilization, we see in many texts and books mentions of rudimentary, let's say, ideas that we can consider them as pre-theories to evolution. So Al-Jahiz in the 8th century talked about something similar to evolution. Ibn Miskawayh, and then Ikhwan al-Safa after him, and then even Ibn Khaldun in the 14th century. And they talked about changing of species with time. They even talked about to the extent of human evolution, to a certain extent. So this idea of change with time of a species being derived from a common ancestor, was not new to the psyche of the Islamic civilization, scientific, let's say, arena. And when these people, these Islamic scholars, were talking about evolution, they were not attacked as being kuffar because of these ideas. Because to them they were practicing Islam the way it should be, and people understood Islam the way it should be. So it was okay. Even after Darwin, Darwin's theory was produced in the 1850s. Even after Darwin, in the 1880s, there were some scholars, Islamic scholars, who actually read the origin of the species, read about the theory of evolution, and amongst them is Al-Jisr, who was in Lebanon in the 1880s. And he produced a treatise which was not against evolution per se. He engaged it in a dialogue, a very healthy dialogue. We had Ahmad Midhat, who was an Uthmani intellect, who had no problem with evolution. And even to talk about evolution and the controversy, it really wasn't translated into Arabic till 1928. Okay? So this is kind of, the exposure to evolution per se was not across the board for every human being in the Islamic world. It was only the elite who were exposed to it, and as you can see, there wasn't much of a problem when it was first coming out. But then, so what happened? How come we hear that people are against evolution. And then we see the statistics coming out. This was a few years ago and was published in Science, where a group of scientists went around the Islamic world doing a survey, as you can see in different countries, trying to assess how do Muslims perceive evolution, whether they agree or disagree. And as you can see, over 50% actually disagree with evolution. So how come, if the past nobody disagreed with evolution as an idea to start with, or then later, even when Darwin published his book, why today people seem to have a problem? And I'm going to share some recent research we actually did in Jordan, where we evaluated teachers who teach biology and evolution in high school in Jordan. And what we found is that 47%, this is very fresh, we haven't published it yet, 47% of the teachers did not support teaching of evolution, okay? But when you dig deep to understand why, it's only 21% of those cited contradiction with religion as a reason. So there are other reasons they don't teach it, because they don't understand the science. To them, it's very vague. You know, when you're a teacher and you don't know something, you avoid teaching it, okay? So it's not because there's a contradiction. So we need to be careful when we cite research or we do our own research. What are the questions we propose? What are the terms we're using? And we're going to see how this plays a role. So this comes to the second part of so this is, to me, why I don't see any problem. Now, the second part is, where does this disagreement with evolution, where did it come from in the past, let's say, 200 years? So I start with a number of things, and these are my own personal analysis as a disclaimer, since I'm not a historian, but this is from my own. So first, after Darwin, when Darwin proposed his theory, this was the end of the Ottoman Empire. And we had less and less scientists from the Islamic world. So it was at a decline. The whole Islamic civilization was at a decline. So we had less qualified natural scientists to actually understand what Darwin was talking about. And this is a very important point, because if you don't understand the biology, then you're not going to understand what the whole theory is about. Second, when Darwin, like 1850 and onwards, till at least the 1970s, education was restricted to the elite in the Muslim Arab communities. It wasn't for everybody. Now, at the same time, we must be aware of the resistance that Darwin had from his Christian colleagues. Now, I'm not an expert on Christianity, and I know that Christianity has many sects, but at least there were some who were against Darwin. I know some say that they supported Darwin, but there were some, and they were very vocal, who were against Darwin and claimed that Darwin's theory contradicts Christian religion from their perspective for various reasons. Now, this disagreement did not go unnoticed by the Muslim scholars. And from my perspective, the Muslim scholars, they didn't have any references from their own Muslim scientists, their own biologists, to go ask them, what do you think about Darwin? So the reference was the Christian scientists or the Western scientists, and it was the Christians who were Westerners who were against the Western scientists, against Darwin. And I'm sure in their psychology they said, if these Christians think Darwin is against religion, and the Christians are people of the book, and we are people of the book, then they must, and you're right, and who kafir, right? He's going against religion, against Allah, then we might as well adopt their position, because we don't have anything else to adopt. So the position of the Christians against Darwin was, I think, was adopted unconsciously by many of the Muslim, let's say, scholars or religious authorities. Now, and I'm going to say, I tell a story here which supports this kind of prediction. So I don't know if you know of the American University of Beirut in Lebanon. It's a pretty well-known university. Now, this university was established in the late 19th century. And it was first established not as a university, it was a missionary school, where it was based on Christianity. And it was only for men, by the way, when it first opened. And what they had done around the 1880s, they had invited, as a professor of biology, an American professor who was a pro-evolutionary guy, pro-Darwin. So he came there, and he gave a talk about evolution, probably similar to my talk. Well, he was kicked out of the university next day, because he was talking pro-Darwin. And for the Christians at that school, this was like blasphemous. At the same time, we had Al-Jisr at the same time, supporting what Darwin was saying. So we can see here how this was not a problem with Islam. This is a problem with certain Christian groups. Now, I want to add to that, Darwin was hijacked by other people who had a political agenda. So there was social Darwinism, talking about race, talking about people being better than other people. This was hijacked by the colonizer to give an excuse for colonizing other people. And so in the psychology and in the mindset of the colonized, who are the Arab Muslims around the world, Darwinism, evolution was associated with colonialism, imperialism, everything, right? Everything bad in the psychology. And of course, atheism, because of the Christians who accused him of atheism, not the Muslims at that point, right? So all of this was, oh my God, like these guys are colonizing us using Darwin as an excuse. And I don't have a biologist Muslim to ask him, what is the biology that Darwin is talking about, right? So I'm going to assume those roles. What else? Even after there became more and more educated people, we had more and more scientists, say in the second half of the 20th century, still the Muslim scholars, when you come in, they were associating creationism in a different way. So let me give you an example. Remember that survey I showed you, that they were doing a survey across the Muslim world, asking them, are you a creationist? Now, terms and how we define them are very important. So in Christianity, when you say, are you a creationist, it has a particular meaning. It means that you believe that God created everything spontaneously, life on earth is, the whole universe is short, it's only 6,000 years according to the Bible, etc., etc. Now when you use the same term and ask a Muslim, Arab, whatever, and use the term creationist, now creationism means something else in the Muslim vocabulary, in the Muslim way of thinking. Creationist doesn't necessarily mean everything is created spontaneously. It could mean that you believe there's a creator. Now, how and where and what did the creator do? That's a different issue. That's a more complex unpacking of the question. But if I ask, are you a creationist? Maybe somebody could ask me, are you a creationist? Well, if you say, it depends on how you define that. If it means that there's a God that started everything, yes. So I could maybe have answered yes on that questionnaire, and somebody would have put me in the category, oh, she's against evolution. You see what I mean? So the terms used in these questionnaires are not always tailored specifically to the culture, the way of thinking, the terminology, and so on. So you may have data that is not very correct. And of course, we have religious groups who take advantage in every religion, not just Muslims and Christianity, for their own political agenda, for their own thing, to manipulate how people think and how people ask questions. So we talked about language and terminology, and also about misinterpretation of religious texts. So people can go and say, okay, we take everything you said, but if you go to certain texts, there appears to be a contradiction, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But again, who interprets is a human being, and that human being can err. And it's okay, right? If you make an interpretation and you're right, you get 2 rewards, and if you're wrong, you get 1 reward. But that doesn't mean that that interpretation is set in stone and that that's the only way we can look at things. So also, interpretation is up for grabs. And ultimately, again, it's lack of freedom. Because when I start questioning interpretations of religious scholars, it's not going to end with questioning the interpretation of religious scholars. It's going to keep on questioning everybody in authority. And so a lot of our countries in the Arab world and the Muslim world don't want that. They're dictators and they don't want you to keep questioning. So no, let's stick to how it is and no questions. So how do I go about doing this, right? Again, I go back to the original stand, that the Quran is not a book of science. I am not going to look into it to find evidence for evolution at any level or in any verse at all. And I don't want to go there, because if you go there and then suddenly the science changes, what happens to your interpretation, right? So the Quran is wrong again? It's not its job. The job of the Quran is not to provide evidence for scientific discoveries. It's only there to tell you how to think. And so, and that's why the ijtihad is open, right? What is ijtihad? It's you depend on the Quran or the Sunnah to come up with verdicts about how you live your life, and you use interpretations of the Quran and of the verse, but if you make a mistake, it's okay. Because a lot of people, I feel, have a tension. What about somebody who interpreted the Quran 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 500 years ago? And they take it as if that's a Quran by itself, when it isn't. It's a human being who interpreted. And that's why today this is a call for people to look at these texts, doing their religious, their scholarship, and gaining the expertise, not just any layman, but to have a new way of looking at things in the light and the context of what we know today in terms of science and other things around us. However, just because somebody's always going to ask me, oh, but this verse and that verse, and how come خلقنا الإنسان في أحسن تقويم? Like, how can you say that we're that evolution means that we came from a common ancestor? So I say, okay, fine. If you want to play that game, although I don't like to, and I don't want to go there, but I'll do it once, just once. So I put up the verses that إنه خلق الله في أحسن تقويم. No? They're in English, but I'm sure you can understand the Arabic. And to me, again, we go back to the words and terminology. The word that has been translated into English, ahsan, it's either translated most good, in other verses it's called the best, but the word in Arabic is ahsan. What does ahsan mean? Now, this is the beauty of the Arabic language, that you have synonyms upon synonyms to explain what it means. So if I wanted to look at ahsan and what does it mean, to me, ahsan means the most fit. Why? لأنه, for example, let's take looking at a diversity of species. If we take bacteria that lives in very hot water, like we know there's bacteria that lives at even 90 degrees Celsius. So the bacteria has evolved to be the most fit to live in that environment. Can I live in that environment? No. Can I? Can we as a human being live in an environment of 90 degrees Celsius? We can't. And so similarly, we cannot, therefore, bacteria has evolved to be the most fit for its environment. We have evolved to be the most fit for our environment. فنحن أحسن لبيئتنا, and the bacteria is أحسن for its environment as well. So you can find interpretations if you want to. Although again, I'm against that. But if somebody ever gets me there. The other thing is the word create. So everybody has a problem, right? They said, Allah in the Quran says He created, the different animals and plants or whatever, or He created Adam or whatever. And they say create, in their meaning, means it's spontaneous or instantaneous. And then I question, I say, wait a minute. There are many verses in the Quran that talks about creating of the sun and the moon. And I haven't heard people object to creation of the sun and the moon being explained of taking billions of years according to some physics law, that they evolved or they became to be according to those physics laws. Nobody has a problem with the word creation in the Quran. But when I talk about, for example, human beings or other creatures, that it took them millennia to evolve, and the word creation is used, then it has to be spontaneous. You see the contradiction? So why can I use creation one way for plants and for the sun and the moon, but I can't use it in the same way for other creatures? Again, the problem of time. We as Muslims don't have a problem with time, which is a problem with Christianity for certain groups, because it's all about the 6,000 years. There's no definition of time. Time is left open for Muslims. So yeah, fine, we could take millions of years for anything to evolve, that's okay. And by the way, there is no contradiction with the presence of a God and all the laws of evolution. Because laws of evolution, and what Darwin came up as an explanation, is trying to explain the mechanisms by which these different species evolved. He doesn't go and talk about how the origin of life or the universe started. That wasn't the argument. That wasn't the question. His question was trying to explain how they progress and how they come to be. So we also need to not mix between how life originated and how things came to be. And usually when you have two explanations for something complicated, it is always the simplest one that is the most elegant one that is the correct one. And to me, that is more proof on the presence of a God, that from a very simple beginning, He was able to put the mechanisms, the laws, to come for all this diversity, rather than creating every one of them spontaneously as it is. And for those who disagree with evolution or Darwin, I first asked them the question, did you actually read his book before you start to disagree? And most of them haven't. They're just quoting somebody else who quoted someone else, and nobody's actually gave him the credit of reading the book, which is a fundamental as a Muslim to read, to seek knowledge. And this is the last paragraph in his second edition, and I think this is beautiful, where he says, how it started, for me, it's Allah, God. For others, it could be nature and some other, unknown thing, or something we don't even know what it is. But evolution is not about that. Evolution is about finding the laws, like the physics laws, like Einstein's laws, like Newton's laws. The laws that governed how biological species were produced and still keep coming. Now, the last part of my talk is when we talk about human evolution. So people up till here will say, okay, we believe, we get it, we accept. All right, all the species evolved except for humans. And that's a no-no. No, human evolution is impossible. And to me, it's like, I remind everybody of the verse where Allah asks us not to be arrogant. And why are humans different? Why can't they be one with the rest of, diversity and the rest of the species? Why not? So there's an arrogance that we are warned of in the Quran not to fall for. And again, if you want to go into the interpretations, there's different terms used to explain different ways of looking at humans. And I'm not going to go there, but there are different verses that talk about it. But to me, in the end, when somebody asks me, so how do you come to terms with the story of Adam? Again, back to the first thing I said, it's about storytelling, right? We learn through stories. What is the story of Adam coming to be? To me, that is a story for me to learn how to treat my fellow humans. It's not a story where I'm going to find the scientific evidence for a scientific theory. So it is, what is the purpose of the story? That is how I look at it. And lastly, people tell me, but you can't explain evolution of humans. Their brain is so complicated that could have never been evolved from something much simpler. Well, we don't even understand the brain. So we can't claim because we don't understand it that it didn't evolve. Similarly, in the past people thought that many diseases were actually bad spirits, right? That you got the plague because of a bad spirit. And then we realized, no, it's a bacteria, it's a virus. Even now, psychiatric diseases, they think it's a jinn, when we know it's a chemical imbalance. So similarly, many things that we think today we don't understand, that doesn't mean they don't have a scientific explanation based on a law. That leads me to miracles. So to me, miracles are not supernatural phenomena. They are phenomena that follow scientific laws put by God that we don't understand, that we need to discover yet to make sense of them. And that even we need to remember as we discover these new things that we are limited in our biology ourselves. Our neurons have a limitation to what we can understand. The tools we have are limited. And I'm going to give you an example of that. So let's imagine that you are an ant. An ant, namle. Ants we know as biologists, ants can only imagine 2 dimensions. Right, left, front, back. They can't imagine up and down. So only 2 dimensions. That's why when they go up a wall, they keep falling. So let's imagine you're an ant and you live in a town of ants. You go into your house. Your house is a circle. You open the door, you go in, you close the door. For all you know as an ant, your biology, your neurons, the connections can only comprehend 2 dimensions. Nothing can change that. Unless you evolve to another species, you get more neurons. So you think you're safe in your house, you close the door. So imagine a ball, a 3-dimensional sphere, coming and bouncing into your home. It's coming from up. Up is another dimension. You as an ant cannot absorb, can't even comprehend. So to your cognition, what do you see? You see something appearing out of nowhere and then disappearing if it bounces back up. So what do you say? Oh my God, this is like supernatural, this is, I can't explain it, it's weird, when we know it's just a 3rd dimension. So therefore, as human beings, we are also limited in our biology, in the number of neurons we have. So we may comprehend at some point, but we may not either. So we need to keep that in mind as we go through. So what's my conclusion? First, if you appear to see a contradiction between Islam and science, what do you do? First, as a scientist, you have to check the science, right? Because we have to be skeptical. Newton's laws worked for a while, and then Einstein came up with a whole new set of laws to explain the phenomena around them. So we need to keep in mind that science is always changing. We need to keep in mind that new tools could come up to help us learn and discover new science, and our limitations in our biology in comprehending things. Then, if we still have a contradiction, we need to go back and say where this contradiction came from. So if you're looking at the Quran and you're using a translation or an interpretation, that is done by a human, and therefore it is up to be reinterpreted and changed again by somebody who has the qualifications. Okay? And then even when we come together to interpret the Quran, I call that it shouldn't be one person interpreting the Quran, especially not today. Because with all the advances in different categories of life, no person can have all the knowledge. So I call for committees of people who have the religious background, committees for the scientists in that particular field that has a contradiction, language experts to give us what are the synonyms of the different words, and so on and so forth. And to have all these people together coming to find an interpretation that fits what's happening around us. But even if they do, that should not stop. We need to interrogate this again every time, because science is changing, the world is changing, and so on. And having multiple opinions is very, very healthy. And this is what Islam is all about. It's about diversity. And of course, we need to teach philosophy and humanities, and not just science. I'm going to end with this beautiful ayah in the Quran. For people who tell me, Rana, you're going to dangerous ground when you say people can ask any questions. And everybody tells me, but there's a red line to some of the questions. And I say, no, there isn't any red line. And we have, again, what is the Quran? It tells me how to think. It doesn't give me the answer. So this is from Surah Al-Baqarah. When Ibrahim tells Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and I'm paraphrasing here, إِنُّ أَرِنِي كَيْفَ تُحْيِي الْمَوْتَى. Show me how you can bring back from the dead. And what does Allah tell him? Allah tells him, no, you can't, there's a red line. What do you mean? He's asking Allah. And Allah says, are you sure? أَوَلَمْ تُؤْمِنْ? He said, قَبَلَ وَلَكَنْ لِيَطْمَئِنَّ قَلْبِي. Like, I need evidence. This is scientific. Like, I need evidence. And what does Allah say? No, you got to believe blindly. What does He do in the ayah? He shows him the evidence. He goes piece by piece. So to me, this is the call to ask questions. Because everything you do today, somebody could say, we don't care about evolution, we're living our lives, we're taking the vaccines, we're eating the food, but ultimately it may affect you if you're going to go into stem cells and medicine and so on. So it does affect us and affect the laws we do. And the way we have to start all this is through education and reading. So that's a call for tomorrow's lecture to attend, because it's going to be totally different. And it's about humanities. This is a call, maybe in the future you'll bring somebody from Jordan. We have a new institution about critical thinking. So how does the story end? There's no black and white. And this is something we need to comprehend. There's no black and white in nature. There's no black and white in religion. There's no black and white in how we live our lives. It's a fluid relationship. It's a continuum where we keep interrogating. And that's what brings the beauty of life, the spice of life. That's what makes us wake up every morning, that we want to do something new. We have a new question to address. And the reason I bring it up, who cares about evolution, right? Who cares? You're living with it and without it. But to me, it's a controversy that was not part of our history in our heritage. We never had a problem between religion and science. And we imported this problem from the West. What scares me is what else have we imported and assumed it is ours and our problem when it's really not our problem. Let's focus on our real problems that we have and solve them rather than importing another problem and create more problems for ourselves. So think of other examples of other problems. And lastly, this is a call for the third lecture coming up on Wednesday. So it's a long road, but it's gonna. And if we're gonna make real change, it's about starting with small steps and believing in that and reading. There's a number of books and thinking outside the box. So I'm going to leave you with this 1-minute movie. It's about thinking outside the box. And even if people don't like what you're saying and you think what you're doing is right, just go do it. Thank you very much.